Thank you to Karis Morgan as our orchestra director, and that was her ministry team. What a great reminder, and I'm assuming that Adam Morgan, when he wrote that text, as we turn to 1 Peter chapter 5, I'm assuming that he was thinking of that comforting truth in James 1:17, that every good and perfect gift comes down from the unchanging Father. And because the Father never changes, His love for us never changes, we can know that everything that He gives us is a good gift. Everything that He gives us is a perfect gift. And yet, even though that's true, we often worry. I'm not even going to ask this morning how many of you worry, because some of you would be too worried to put up your hand because you'd be worried about what people would think of you. From the youngest of us to the oldest of us, all of us struggle with worry. All of us struggle with what ifs. When you're really little, you wonder, what if I don't have any friends when I get to kindergarten? What if I don't get picked for the team at recess? As you get older, you wonder, what if my friends don't really like me? What if I don't make the team? What if I don't make the grades that I need? What if I don't get into college? What if I don't finish college? What if I don't get a diploma? What if I don't get a spouse? What if I don't get married? And then when you get married, you wonder, what if my spouse isn't faithful? What if we can't have kids? What if our kids don't love Jesus? How are we going to pay for them to go to college? What if Uncle Joe doesn't bail them out and pay their school loans off for them when they accrue all this debt? What if, as I get older, I have health issues and problems? What if I get cancer? What if I get Alzheimer's and don't even recognize my dearest loved ones in this life? Through every stage of life, from kindergarten to senior adults, all of us have reasons to worry. All of us have what the King James translates as the word anxiety or worry as cares, concerns in life. But this morning, we're going to look at God's solution. And we're going to see something really interesting in God's solution. We're going to see a connection between worry and pride. That maybe the reason you worry is because you're proud. Now, usually when we think about people who struggle with anxiety, people who worry a lot, we don't think about necessarily proud people. But in this text, the passage is going to show us that humility frees us from worry by trusting God. We see, first of all, humility frees us from worry by trusting God, by submitting ourselves. Humility trusts God by submitting to His order. Now, we remember in this letter, we've been looking at this for over a year now, that Peter's writing to Christians who are scattered, who are battered. Many of them are slaves. They're disenfranchised, they're marginalized, they're pushed to the periphery of life. These are people who are going through severe struggles, through injustice, and yet when we get to chapter 2, Peter says, submit. Submit to the governing authorities. Submit to the king. Submit to the emperor. Submit to a boss, even if he's a bad boss, even if he's froward. Submit, wives, submit to your husbands. Even if they're not believers, submit to them. And we look at a word like that that's really almost an obscenity in our culture. That is a dirty word, to use the word submission. And the reason is because authority has been abused so heinously. From Epstein to Weinstein, from #MeToo to the SBC to the Roman Catholic Church, everywhere we look, the institutions that were once revered, institutions that were thought of as respectable, now we see that they have abuse in them. And so the idea of telling someone to submit to an authority when that authority could be abusive makes us recoil. And maybe even today you say, well, how can a wife who may be more intelligent than her husband, more educated than her husband, have a better paying job than her husband, maybe she can do more pull-ups than her husband, how is she supposed to submit to that guy? Or maybe you say, you don't know my boss. I am a harder worker than my boss. I'm more competent than my boss. I'm better educated than my boss. I'm more ethical than my boss. You just don't know the boss that I'm supposed to submit to. How in the world can I submit to a husband like that? How in the world can I submit to a boss like that? How can I submit to a leader like that? And the answer that Peter gives us is in the next phrase, be clothed with humility. You have to put on humility, and really it's put on the slave apron of humility. That's what this Greek word is referencing. It was used of a slave girding themselves with a towel or an apron to go bend down and do some kind of menial labor. Now, what picture do you think was in Peter's mind when he uses this phrase? He remembers when the God of the universe, the King of kings and Lord of lords, girded himself with a slave towel and bent over and washed the disciples' filthy feet. Remember, Peter at first says, no, don't do it, Lord. You shouldn't be doing this. But this is exactly what Jesus was teaching his followers. If you want to be part of my kingdom, this is what you clothe yourself with. Humility. You wash others' feet. You gird yourself with the slave apron of humility. That is the only way you can submit in God's authority structure, is by putting on the mind of Christ, putting on the slave apron of Christ, and showing humility to others. Now, this morning you might say, well, what if I don't want to do that? What will happen if I refuse? Well, look back at verse 5. For God resists the proud. That was a military term of opposition. That could be used of straight arming someone. God will straight arm the proud. Think about if The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, wrestler, actor, went to his daughter Jasmine's second grade class for Donuts for Dads. And he's standing in the back of the room, and he notices there's this little boy in the class who's picking on his little Jasmine. And he thinks, that's the bully that she talks about when she comes home. That's the kid who's always tormenting my daughter. Well, at recess time, they go out on the playground field. Everybody wants The Rock to play pickup football with them. And so, of course, he gets on his daughter Jasmine's team. She's the quarterback. He's the center. And on the other side of the line of scrimmage is that little second grade boy who's taunting his daughter. I'm going to take you out. I'm going to take you down. And so The Rock snaps the ball to Jasmine. This little 45-pound boy comes running as fast as he can across the line of scrimmage, and The Rock just puts out his arm, and bam, the kid's on his back, crying for an ambulance. Peter says that's what God does to the proud. God opposes the proud. We see this throughout Scripture. I love reading through the book of Daniel, and you see all these powerful emperors, these kings like Nebuchadnezzar, who gets up on his high horse. He starts crowing like a rooster in pride about all that he's doing. And as the words are in his mouth, God reduces him to the state of an animal. He roams like an animal for years. God says, no, Nebuchadnezzar, you're not powerful. I oppose the proud. Boom, straight arm. Then we see King Belshazzar, who's having this epic party. It's sensuous, there's drinking. In fact, there's so many people who want to get into this crazy party that they come to him and they say, we've run out of silverware. He says, I've got an idea, go over to the temple. Let's desecrate God's silverware. Let's bring that into this huge epic party. And again, the handwriting is on the wall, literally, that night. The Medo-Persian soldiers are crawling through the sewer. That very night, they overthrow his kingdom and they kill Belshazzar. God says, I oppose the proud. Boom, straight arm. You're done. We come to the New Testament, and there's this rich farmer in Luke chapter 12 who's bragging he's had a really, really good year as a small businessman. He says, I'm increased in goods. I have need of nothing. I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger barns. And God says, you fool. This night your soul will be required of you. You're not all powerful. God opposes the proud. Doesn't matter if you live in the White House. Doesn't matter if you're a despotic ruler of Russia. Doesn't matter who you are. Your arm is too short to box with God. This is the God of the universe. When you lift yourself up in pride, God says, no, I oppose that. He straight arms the proud, but he gives what to the humble? He gives grace. There's nothing that we need more in this life than God's unmerited favor. And Peter says the only way you can receive it is you have to humble yourself. Or as Jesus says, you have to come with the faith of a little child. You have to come low. That's the only way you receive God's grace. He gives grace to the humble. So number one, Peter says, humility trusts God by submitting to his order. Our culture may say, well, no, that's not the right order. That's disordered. But what God says is disordered, what God says is not correct, that's what we submit to, because God will oppose the proud. Second, humility trusts God by submitting to his hand. Look at verse 6. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God. And some of you might be saying, wait a second, I thought God was spirit. I mean, God doesn't have a physical hand, does he? God doesn't clip his fingernails. God doesn't give people high five. No, that is anthropomorphic language. That is a figure of speech to describe in human terms the sovereignty of God, the power of God. Just like sometimes a man, a fighter, a soldier, a boxer, maybe your dad had big hands that he would pound on the table or that he would hold you with, and you felt a sense of security in those powerful hands. In the same way, the Bible often uses that poetic image of the hands of God to refer to the fact that he is sovereign, that he is in control. That to humble yourself is not to say that my life is out of control, it's to say my life is out of my control. There are forces in this universe that I'll never regulate. There are mysteries in this universe that I'll never understand in my small finite mind. But I believe my God is in control. As Daniel says, none can stay his hand. No one is going to stand against the powerful hand of God. And so what that means is that any crisis that you face, any trial that you face, any room that you walk into, a boardroom or a hospital room, there's not a square inch of that room where God's hand is not in control, where his sovereignty doesn't rule over every square inch of this universe. He created it and he rules it. Everything is under his hand. The question is, will you submit to his mighty hand? Will you humble yourself and say, this God, yes, he's almighty, yes, he's all-knowing, but he's a personal God. He is all-loving. Do you trust him that he knows what's best? Do you trust his timing? Look at the next phrase, that he may exalt you in due time. Often, the problem, the reason we complain about God or we don't trust God is because his timing is different than ours. He sees the end from the beginning. He knows exactly what he's going to do. He often puts us through a cross before he gives us the crown. He knows the plans that he has for us, our plans to bless us. They're not for evil. He wants to exalt us, but he allows us to go through times of bearing the cross. Now, does anyone in this room say, oh, I just love bearing crosses? I love going through trials. You know, most of us, when we think about trials, we think, God, would you just take the cross off my back? Would you airlift me out of the trial? And yet Peter says, if you're humble, you will submit yourself under God's mighty hand even when he allows adversity. And what's interesting is in the next verse, he says, the anxiety that adversity causes, that's what you need to cast off on him. We like to do the exact opposite. We like to, when God's sovereign hand is allowing adversity, say, no, God, I don't want that. No, how dare you allow that in my life? God, I can't deal with cancer. I can't lose this loved one. How dare you do that? We want to cast off the adversity, and we love to hang on to anxiety. We love our pet worries, all those what ifs. They're hypothetical. They haven't even happened, but we love to hold anxiety and worry close and worry about that. God says, no, you need to do the opposite. You need to embrace the adversity is from my sovereign hand, and then the anxiety that adversity causes, just cast that on me. Give that over to me. Embrace the adversity from my sovereign hand. Reject the anxiety. Cast the anxiety on me. See, often my pride is the very reason God allows adversity in my life. It's to keep me humble. This is what Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 12. He says, lest I should be exalted above measure. So, lest I should get a big head or an inflated ego through the abundance of the revelations. He's saying, God gave me this abundance of revelations. He actually gave me a personal tour of heaven. Now, how many of us, if you got a personal tour of heaven, would start to get a pretty big ego spiritually? I mean, you could one-up anybody. Oh, you went to Paris last summer? I went to paradise. Oh, you got to go on a trip to the Holy Land. You saw Jerusalem? I saw the New Jerusalem, just a little bit better. Oh, you poured a stamped concrete patio last summer. I was walking on streets of gold. I mean, if you had literally gotten a personal tour of heaven from Jesus, your ego would get so big. Your spiritual head could get so inflated. What does Paul say God uses to deflate his ego? He says God used a thorn. Look at the next verse, verse 7 of 2 Corinthians 12. There was given to me a thorn in the flesh, again, lest I should be exalted above measure. Now, how does Paul respond to this thorn in the flesh that God's giving him to keep him from getting an inflated ego because he got to see the seventh heaven, because he got to see all these wonderful things? What does God give him? A thorn, what does he do about the thorn? He wants to be out of it. He wants to be rid of it. He says, for this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. 3 times Paul says, Lord, please take away the adversity. Take away the adversity. Take away the adversity. But what was God's response? God says, no, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. God says, no, you need this adversity. You need my mighty hand is going to be shown. My power is going to be shown over your life as you go through this adversity. And so what does that cause Paul to say? He says, okay, the most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. He says, Lord, I've learned to embrace the adversity from your hand. I need your power. I need your almighty hand resting on my life. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. So how do you respond to the thorns in your life? Do you get bitter when God won't remove them? When he won't answer that prayer? When you keep praying, Lord, take it away, and he doesn't? Do you complain? Or do you accept that as coming from God's hand and humble yourself under his mighty hand so that he can lift you up in due time, so that he can show that his grace is sufficient? Peter says humility trusts God by submitting to his order. Humility trusts God by submitting to his hand. Third, humility trusts God by submitting to his care. Casting all your care upon him. Now, what's interesting is this verse is a subordinate clause to verse 6. So he says, humble yourself before God. How? By casting all your care on him. So to reverse that, if you're not casting all your care on him, what are you not doing? You're not humbling yourself. There's some pride in you that says, I don't want to humble myself under his mighty hand. That's the connection here. Now that verb, casting, could be used of a hiker. So imagine you are hiking up to the summit of a 14,000-foot precipice. You get to the top. I mean, your shoulders are aching, your back is aching, your whole body is aching from this huge pack that you had to take up to the top of the mountain. You get to the summit. Now you're coming back down. When you finally get to the base camp, every muscle in your body is screaming for relief, and you unhook that backpack, you cast it off, and you are relieved of all the pressure, all the strain, all the aches that burden was causing. That's the verb that Peter uses here. That's what he says you should do with all of your anxieties, all of your worries. Unhook them and cast them on God. You say, that sounds really good. That sounds like the perfect picture of relief. But how do I do that? How do I cast my cares on God? And most of us, I think, would say, well, you pray about it. And Paul would say, well, that's what I did 3 times. I prayed that God would take away the thorn, but he left me under it. That probably the person you're talking to would say, I pray about this thing all the time. I wake up in the middle of the night, tossing and turning about this thing that I'm worried about. I want to get rid of it. I want to cast on the Lord, but the more I think about it, sometimes it feels like the more I pray about it, the more I worry about it. How do I cast it on the Lord? Well, it's interesting that same word is used in Philippians chapter 4. If you have your Bible, let's turn over to Philippians 4, verse 6. This is another very familiar passage, but a passage where we see this exact word for worry, for anxiety, the word care. So Paul writes to the Philippians in Philippians 4:6, be careful. That's our word. Be anxious, be worried. You say, great, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I love to hold my anxieties close. Be careful for nothing. Paul says, don't worry about anything, but then he's going to say, pray about everything. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. So he says, worry about nothing, pray about everything. He uses 3 different words for prayer. Prayer, supplication, let your request be made known. You say, that's exactly what I told you casting your cares is. It's giving it to the Lord in prayer. But we missed a phrase there. Did you see the phrase that I skipped over? With thanksgiving. Do you give thanks in everything with thanksgiving? Do you thank God for everything, even for the trials, even for the thorns? Do you thank God for the very things that cause you to worry? Lord, thank you for letting me fail that test. Lord, thank you for letting me get sick. Lord, thank you for letting me lose that loved one. How do we thank God for the very things that cause us to worry, that cause us to be anxious? I heard someone use the illustration of how hard it is sometimes to get up in time for an early flight and setting all these alarm clocks. And I am the same way, that I can be worried. And so if I am about to get up for a flight the next morning, I remember in Indiana, we lived over an hour from the airport. So I would set the radio alarm clock. I would set the alarm on my phone. Then I would ask my wife to set the alarm on her phone. So there was a backup to the backup. So let's just imagine that one day you're supposed to get on this flight, and so you wake up and you realize you've overslept. All 3 of your alarm clocks have malfunctioned. They haven't gone off. And so you realize, I'm supposed to be at the airport. You throw on your clothes, you grab your bag, you don't even brush your teeth, you don't even get to eat, you jump in your car. At that point, are you thanking God for the trifecta of malfunctioning alarms? Siri, I am so grateful for the way you had one job and you didn't even go off in the morning like I told you last night. So you peel out of your driveway, you get on the road, and you're going at least the speed limit as you're driving to the airport, and all of a sudden, this grandma with a blue-haired beehive hairdo that matches her massive Buick the size of an aircraft carrier pulls out in front of you, and she's topping out at 17 and a 45, and you can't get around her. At that point, are you thanking God that this grandma decided to go out today on her drive and get right in front of you just 5 seconds before you would have gone by? You finally get to the airport, you park, you're running towards the security check, and as you're going up, you're always looking to see which line's shorter, and on the one hand, you see this long line of people. On the other hand, you see just the blue-haired grandma. Apparently, she got a handicapped spot, so she's right in front of you. You say, I'm going to go in the shorter line. You get behind her, and then you're horrified as TSA lets all those other guys just right through that line, and they stop you and the grandma, and do every invasive search. The body scan, the pat down, they even take a sample of her hair for testing. At that point, are you saying, Lord, I am so thankful for overzealous security agents. I'm so thankful for the way they protect our nation's homeland, our security. By this point, you realize, I'm going to be late for this flight. And so now you are just, your bags are bouncing as you are running full speed, sprinting. Of course, your gate is on the other side of the concourse. You're running as fast as you can. But as you get up, you realize the ramp is still connected to the airplane. The door is shut, but the ramp's still connected. So you go up to the ticket agent and you say, look, I've got my ticket. Can I get on that flight? She says, sorry, the flight's boarded. You say, but the ramp is still connected. She says, sir, the flight is boarded. You say, I can see 3 empty window seats. There are empty seats on the plane. I have a ticket. I need to get on that flight. She says, sir, the flight is boarded. You say, I can see into the cockpit. The pilots are playing Among Us on their phones. She says, sir, the flight is boarded. Do I need to call security? You say, no, I'm intimately acquainted with them already. You slump down into a chair. You watch the pilots finish their game. You see the ramp retract. They taxi down the runway. They take off, and you realize I'm stranded. There's not another flight for 7 hours. You're going to miss your big meeting. Your boss is going to be furious. You could lose your job. At that point, are you thanking God for that ticket Nazi? I mean, that ticket agent who wouldn't let you get on the airline. So you get on your phone. You schedule another flight, that 7-hour flight. You go and get a bite to eat. You finally get some breakfast. You're scrolling through the news on your phone. You go into the bathroom, and for the first time, you wash your face, you comb your hair, you brush your teeth. At that point, are you singing, praise God from whom all blessings flow? God is so good. God is... You get cleaned up. You walk out of the bathroom, and you realize something is odd. Something seems really uncanny. And then you notice what it is. Nobody in the concourse is sitting down. No one's in their seats. Everybody is gathered in clusters around each of those screens that go down the concourse. And so you think, I need to see what this is. So you take your bag and you go up to the crowd and you get on your tiptoes to look over the person in front of you, and you look up at the screen, and it says on the scroll, breaking news, and then it has a flight number that you recognize, your flight number. And the footage is from a helicopter zooming down at the smoldering rubble of an airplane that clearly had no survivors. At that point, all of a sudden, your Thanksgiving level does a 180-degree turn. Everything that you were fuming at God about, everything you were complaining to God about earlier, suddenly now you're thanking God for. Lord, thank you for the trifecta of malfunctioning alarm clocks. I love Siri. Thank you for the blue-haired grandma and her aircraft carrier getting in front of me, slowing me down. Thank you for the overzealous TSA agents. That was the best pat-down I've ever had. Thank you for the airline Nazi stopping me from getting on that flight. Everything that you were previously so upset at God for, complaining at God for, now you are praising God for. You're thanking Him for. I mean, you've run over, you're jumping up and down, hugging the airline Nazi. You're so thrilled. God, you knew, you were in charge, you were in control. Now you can see God's plan. The point that Peter is asking is, why can't you do that before you see God's plan? Because most of the time in life, we don't see His plan. Why couldn't you thank God before you saw each of these things that was happening? Because most of the time, we say, I would rather doubt His love, impugn His character, question His motives, instead of saying, you know what? Every gift that the Father gives me is a good and perfect gift. It comes from the Father of lights, in whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. His thoughts toward me are always loving. I'm His child. His thoughts towards me will never change. He always loves me 100% of the time. Why can't I trust that everything He allows under His almighty sovereign hand is for my good and for His glory? Why couldn't you thank God for the alarm clocks, the grandma, the airport security, the airline Nazi before you saw the crash? Why don't we trust that God never moves without purpose or plan, that He allows adversity for a purpose? The reason we worry is because we're too proud to simply trust God, that He knows best. He knows what is best for me. He cares for me. And that's what verse 7 says so beautifully. casting all your cares upon him. Why? For he cares for you. God cares for you so much. As Pastor Gordon said last week, God cares for you more than you care for yourself. He cares for you so much. He was willing to be separated for the only time in the history of the universe from his own Son so that you could be united to him. Jesus was willing to die so that you could live. Jesus was willing to be wrapped in your sin so that you could be clothed in his righteousness. You can be free from worry by being humble enough to simply trust God that he cares for you. He's never let you down. Think about the history of your life. He's never made a mistake. He's never made a mistake in the history of the universe. Will you be humble enough to trust him? Then Peter says, you can rest in his care, free from the cares of the world. Humility frees us from worry by trusting God. Let's stand this morning with our heads bowed. I wonder what are you worried about right now in your life? Maybe it's family, maybe it's finances, maybe as a student it's your future as you look ahead, maybe it's your physical health. Will you embrace adversity even as coming from the hand of a loving Father who's all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, and say, I'm just going to cast all my care on him? Or are you going to do the opposite? Are you going to hold on to worry? Are you going to get bitter under the sovereign hand of God for allowing this trial? Do you get bitter when God allows that thorn in your life? Do you complain? Or have you learned like Paul to say, most gladly therefore will I rather glory even in my infirmities, even in this adversity, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me, so that people will look at my life and instead of seeing me, they'll see God's almighty hand. They'll see God's sovereignty. Have you learned to thank God even for the trials because you trust God and submit to his care? This morning as the instruments play, we want to just take a few minutes. We'll have time tonight in our small groups to go deeper into the text and apply this to our lives, but we want to just let the Holy Spirit, if there's some area of your life right now where you say, I need to submit that to the Holy Spirit. I need to be free from worry by humbly submitting myself to God. We want to do that. If you'd like to talk to someone now or after the service, I'll be standing in the lobby. We have pastors standing at the front and back of the auditorium. We would love to talk to you about how you can have a relationship with this God, this all-loving, unchanging God.